Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. If you watch anime, chances are you know the Fate franchise, for better or for worse. Though Fate Stay Night is much more recognizable nowadays for its anime adaptation, Fate began as a visual novel, released in 2004. The visual novel told the story of Shiro Emiya, a high schooler caught up in what's known as the Holy Grail War, where 7 mages use magic to summon a historical figure to fight to the death for an item capable of granting any one wish, the Holy Grail. The visual novel's popularity netted a sequel, Fate Hollow Ataraxia, and eventually 2 spin-off fighting games based on Fate Stay Night's world would be released, these being Fate Unlimited Codes for the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation Portable, and Fate Tiger Colosseum, released only in Japan for the PlayStation Portable. The PSP was becoming a home for Fate video game releases, further exemplified in 2011, which saw the release of Fate Extra exclusively for the PSP, Fate's first dive into the world of RPGs. Fate Extra would also be the first game in the series that wouldn't be tied to the original Fate Stay Night. Instead, Fate Extra takes place in a parallel universe from the original, hoping to tell its own story, though with a few familiar faces. How well does Fate Extra succeed, not just in telling its own story, but in being a fun RPG? Manifest your command seals, summon your servant, and let's turn the page to Fate Extra for the PlayStation Portable. Fate Extra is a dungeon-crawling role-playing game, released in Japan in 2011, and eventually being released in the West November of the following year. As previously stated, Fate Extra takes place in an alternate universe to the original Fate Stay Night visual novel. Rather than magic, Fate Extra has a much greater focus on technology and virtual reality. You, the player, can play as either a male or female protagonist, who you name yourself. You find yourself in an artificial environment called the Moon Cell, where you are participating in a 128 participant tournament known as the Holy Grail War. In the Holy Grail War, each participant, known as Masters, must summon a being known as a servant. Servants are spirits created by the Holy Grail to fight on Masters' behalf, each of which are based on important figures from real history, mythology, or folktale. For example, the mascot of the Fate series, commonly just referred to as Saber, is a gender-bent King Arthur, Artoria Pendragon. These servants are summoned in one of 7 classes, each of which have their own strengths and weaknesses. These classes being Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Caster, Assassin, and Berserker. In Extra's Holy Grail War, each participant in the war fight in one-on-one battles with their servant in hopes of winning the tournament. The winner of the Holy Grail War is granted the titular Holy Grail, an object capable of granting the winner any one wish. Losing the tournament, however, results both in deletion from the digital world and death in the real world. Your character has joined the Holy Grail War and has their avatar enter the Moon Cell. Yet due to an error in the system, they have no memories of who they are or why they decided to participate in the first place. However, not wishing to die, they choose to fight in the war and summon their own servant. The player is given the option between 3 servants, a Saber, Archer, or Caster, each representing a different difficulty. Saber represents the easiest difficulty in the game, as her base stats are very high with a powerful selection of skills to match. Archer is the normal difficulty, having balanced stats all around, but using his more powerful skills in battle requires some setup before they can be unleashed. Finally, we have Caster, who is the hard difficulty, as she has abysmal attack and defense, and will struggle to survive a lot of battles in the early game. However, as you level up, Caster will get access to a variety of powerful skills, which will eventually make her the strongest of the 3 servants, though getting to that point won't be easy. When I first played through this game 2 years ago, I chose Saber as my servant while playing as the male protagonist, so this time I chose Archer as my servant while playing as the female protagonist. Meet Tome, Master of Archer. With your servant summoned, it's your goal to survive each round of the Holy Grail War, obtain the Holy Grail, and regain your memories. Fate Extra's story was enjoyable and compelling. Admittedly, at some points the story can feel like it's stretched a little thin, and would work better in a game that didn't need to stretch out to fit a 30 or so hour RPG. That being said, there's a lot to enjoy with Fate Extra's narrative. The grim setting of a life or death tournament where you slowly watch the amount of people left alive dwindle as each round comes to an end sets a tone of dread as you progress. Even the halls of the school will start to become more barren as you start to reach the end of the game, and only a few participants remain. However, there are also moments of levity mixed in every now and again to keep the game from not feeling too hopeless and provide some nice character interactions. Fate Extra also has some really strong character writing. Every round has a new pairing of master and servant that you'll face off against, and each character is unique and has a compelling story to go with them that you'll learn more about as you encounter them. These various pairings can make for some fun banter, as some get along really well while others don't quite see eye to eye. They're entertaining to see and learn about, so even though the mystery is stretched out a bit, there's still a lot of fun character interactions to fill in the gaps. Each master participating has their own wish and reasoning for being in the Holy Grail War. I've always enjoyed when stories have elements that are more clashes of ideals rather than clashes of good versus evil, so I was intrigued with a lot of the individual character stories that Fate Extra holds. Though not every master is a good person, they still have compelling reasons to fight in the Holy Grail War, making their reason to fight feel just as justified as the players. Even with some of the more antagonistic masters, when a master was defeated and you have to watch them fade away, knowing that they are about to die, it rarely felt like a grand victory, merely that it was either you or them. The dread of the life or death tournament, with the somber feeling of defeating your opponents, gives Fate Extra an extraordinary sense of tone and atmosphere. And the combination of each master and servant's individual stories, with the overall mystery of the protagonist's missing memories, along with the nature of the Holy Grail War, makes for an especially strong narrative, one of my favorites in JRPGs. There was one hurdle in an otherwise fantastic story, and that was the duo in round 4, Lil Ronnie and her Lancer servant. This chapter felt very much like it was added just to pad out the game's runtime. Lancer has a slightly interesting story and some good ideas, but it wasn't fleshed out very well. Meanwhile, the master, Lil Ronnie, has so little in the way of character that I regularly forgot she exists in the game at all. Overall, round 4 could have been removed entirely, and I think doing so would have only improved the experience rather than impair it. Still, one dud pairing compared to the 6 really strong duos isn't too bad, and overall I think the game has an incredibly strong cast of characters. I also enjoyed watching the bond between the protagonist and their servant grow as they advance through the tournament, and the growing bond is even reflected in simple dialogue, such as when you heal your servant. Overall, I think the game's story is one of its strongest qualities, with a good mystery to its plot, a strong tone, and a great ensemble of characters, both master and servant alike. In each round of the tournament, you'll be given 7 days to prepare for the elimination battle with your opponent. Before these 7 days are up, you'll need to find 2 triggers to be allowed to enter the fight. To find these triggers, you'll enter and search around the arena, the game's version of dungeons. In these dungeons, you are free to explore and find items scattered about, and search for the triggers to be able to advance to the elimination round. When you first enter an arena, your map will be completely blank, which you will fill out as you explore. Any sections of the map you fill out will stay that way after you leave, so you can break up your exploration over the course of several days. You'll encounter various enemies on the map which you'll have to fight. Which brings us to Fate Extra's combat. Fate Extra's combat system works on a rock, paper, scissors mechanic, where you select one of 3 moves: attack, defend, and break. Break smashes through defend, defending stops and counters attacks, and attacks hit and prevent break. At the start of each turn of battle, you select 6 moves in advance for each round in a turn, in which you will then watch your attacks play out. If you selected right, you'll damage the enemy. Get it wrong, and you'll take damage. If either side successfully lands 3 attacks in a row uninterrupted, then they will land a 4th extra attack for free, allowing additional damage to be dealt. As you defeat enemies, you'll gain experience and level up, which will also net the player skill points, which they can use to upgrade their servant stats. As you upgrade stats, you'll also learn skills which can provide you various benefits in battle, or be strong attacks that you can use to deal additional damage to your enemies. Hearing that the combat works on a rock, paper, scissors mechanic is probably an immediate turnoff for most players. However, the game actually does something rather interesting with it. At the start of each arena, combat can admittedly be rather frustrating and difficult. As you don't know what your enemy will choose, it's entirely possible to guess everything wrong in the first round, and your servant's health will vanish in the blink of an eye due to sheer bad luck. However, the more you fight the same type of enemy, you'll begin to analyze and gain more knowledge about them. What this will do is tell you what kind of move an enemy will use in one of the rounds of combat chosen at random. And as you fight the enemy even more, eventually even more of their moves will be told to you. So combat in each arena will start off rather difficult and luck-based, but the more you fight and survive, the easier combat will become until the point where you know exactly what your enemy will use almost every round. Frustrating though a combat system like this can sometimes be, this is actually a pretty cool translation of one of the most critical aspects of each iteration of Fate, that being knowledge is power. As mentioned previously, the mascot of Fate is King Arthur. However, during a Holy Grail war, her master will refer to her solely by her class, Saber, and not her true name. This is because if the enemy were to know who the servant was, they can research them and discover any unique abilities they had or possible weaknesses, thus making that servant much more likely to lose the Holy Grail war. This theme carries over to Fate Extra. At the beginning of each week, you are introduced to a new master you'll be fighting for that round. Throughout that week, as you try and find the two triggers, you'll encounter the enemy master and their servant in a variety of events and fights. Oftentimes, completing these various events will increase the enemy servant matrix, which will give you a little information about the servant. The matrix goes up by 1, 2, and 3 as you go throughout the week. And if you successfully get to Matrix 3, on the day of the elimination battle, you can organize your information and uncover the servant's true identity, and upgrade the Matrix to E. Some, not all, of these events are missable, but you'll want to ensure you'll get a Matrix E before each fight with an enemy servant. Just like with the basic enemies in the arena, the more you know about your enemy, the more moves will be shown at the start of each turn during the elimination battle, thus changing the overall difficulty of some really tough boss fights. While the combat is nothing special when fighting random enemies in the arena, it does shine through during these servant battles, which require careful consideration of each action, making for plenty of tense and strategic boss fights. These Matrix levels being missable can lead to some rather tedious moments, however. Sometimes raising the Matrix level requires you to speak with a specific character somewhere in the school hub world, but it won't tell you who, or even that you even need to do so. So this means needing to walk around the entire school speaking with every character each day, just so you don't miss out on vital events. Having to do this for each possible day can get very dull, especially since they may not always yield any actual results. Honestly though, even without the incentive of making boss fights easier, doing research to find out who each servant is was probably my favorite part of the whole game. Some servants can be pretty easy to tell who they are purely based off of their design, but others are not so clear cut, so using the various clues to play along was actually really fun. The game even seems to know this, as it allows you to go to the library in the school at different points in the week to read up on key terms about the enemy servant. Doing so doesn't raise the matrix at all, but can give you, the player, some additional hints as you try to figure out the mystery. It's a clever idea that is thoroughly interesting to do. However, if you prefer not to and just want to get a move on, then you can just ignore the library without penalty. Another praise I'd like to give Fate Extra is how much replay value it has. As already discussed, there are 3 servants you can select, each with a different playstyle and backstory to change up the experience. Not only that, after the 3rd week, you'll be given a choice that will put you down one of 2 different story routes, which change up how certain story segments play out, and more excitingly, each route has 2 unique servants that you only face on that route. There's even unique dialogue between you and your servant depending on if you play as a boy or a girl. With all this, Fate Extra has a tremendous amount of replayability, with each combination of servant, route, and gender giving its own differing experience, and I think that's very commendable. Fate Extra also boasts an excellent soundtrack. A lot of its music are these very nice jazz-like pieces, which have some really fun energy to it. Meanwhile, the Game Over track is this beautifully somber piece that I love listening to. The music can get a little repetitive though. As with any RPG, you'll need to fight a lot of enemies, and as such you'll be listening to the battle theme quite a bit. But the fact that I wasn't sick of it by the end of the game is a testament to how good the tracks are. Overall, Fate Extra has a great soundtrack. I wish I could just end the video here. I wish I could just say that Fate Extra is a great RPG with an excellent story and characters, a unique combat system, and tons of replayability. because I see all these things that Fate Extra does right, and I want it to be amazing. But it isn't. Fate Extra is unfortunately bogged down by a myriad of issues that bring down the experience, and it brings it down hard. The first and perhaps least significant issue is the visual variety of dungeons. Each dungeon ultimately boils down to you traveling through the exact same looking set of squares. Yes, the background of the dungeon will change, such as being undersea or looking at a castle, but you never actually get to explore these backdrops. It's just the exact same set of squares that change a bit in color, and I got so sick of it well before the game came to a close. Secondly, this game is very grindy. To even remotely stand a chance in the elimination round, you'll need to grind your ass off in the dungeons. The game gives a recommended level you should be at before each elimination round, but I found they weren't very good recommendations, and would usually be too under leveled to comfortably face the enemy servant. It was usually better to fight 2 to 3 levels above the recommended level. Grinding can take a long while in Fate Extra, especially as you go over the recommended level, which kills the pace of the game and makes the experience a huge slog, especially as you reach the later weeks. If the game's story wasn't as interesting as it was, I don't think I would have had much desire to push through these moments. Finally, easily the worst part of Fate Extra is that with the exception of elimination rounds against a servant, if you fall in battle, you will be forced to restart from your last save. In our last video, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, I mentioned that it had a similar issue. However, TMS allowed you to save anywhere at any time, so if I forgot to save and I had to restart from an hour before, usually that was my fault. In Fate Extra, you can only save outside the arena. This makes grinding very frustrating. Whenever you enter then leave the arena, the day you're on will immediately come to an end and you'll move on to the next day. As such, you're not able to save in the middle of grinding sessions. Because of the luck-based nature of combat, it's very easy for an enemy to get lucky and take you out, even if you had a good amount of health left. You could have been grinding for half an hour, or more, and all it takes is one unlucky round to render all of that time null and void, to which you'll need to start all over again. And who's to say the same thing won't happen again during the next grinding session? This is made even worse in instances where you encounter an enemy servant or need to perform some special action in the arena on a specific day. Some of the challenges can be very difficult, and surviving them is a feat in and of itself. However, if you want to be at decent level before the elimination round, you'll still need to grind, even after completing that difficult task. This means if you lose, you'll not only have to waste so much time grinding again, you'll need to do that difficult challenge again as well. Yes, you have the choice to play it safe and exit the arena as soon as you finish whatever encounter occurred. However, the day-based nature of Fate Extra means you have a limited amount of time to grind before the servant battle arrives, with no way to freely grind otherwise. In addition, since you don't know what to expect in a given week, for all you know, the challenge you'll have to face the next day could be even more difficult, making grinding after it worse than if you just did it the day prior. Fate Extra also has the occasional dialogue choice you can select for the protagonist to say or do certain things. While this often just changes the dialogue a little, occasionally selecting the wrong choice can also lead to game overs, adding yet another element causing you to need to restart from your last save. This all makes for a terribly frustrating experience that could have been eliminated almost entirely if they just didn't limit when you're able to save. The amount of times I needed to retry the same day over and over again due to a single round of bad luck was soul draining, and can mark the end for many playthroughs for those who understandably can't handle the constant restarting. Though Fate Extra has a ton of replayability, it's hard to be motivated to do so, knowing how much grinding and potential frustration will be weighting down each subsequent playthrough. These issues are bad, really bad, and they absolutely tank what was so close to being an incredible JRPG. At the time of this recording, a remake of Fate Extra, called Fate Extra Record, is in the works. Visually, the game looks great, but not much has been shown for it, making it hard to tell what changes will be made to the original, and I'm especially hoping they don't take the Final Fantasy VII Remake approach with the story. I hope most of my issues with this game are resolved with the remake, as I would love to recommend Fate Extra to others due to its strong story, characters, and atmosphere. but I just can't do that due to its numerous gameplay shortcomings, all of which serve to drain the fun out of the experience, which is a real shame. Fate Extra is an unfortunate case. For everything it gets right, Fate Extra actually had the potential to be among some of my all-time favorite RPGs. But when Fate Extra gets bad, it gets bad, and the flaws are all but impossible to ignore. If what I described with the story and characters interested you, I'd still recommend giving this game a try to experience it for yourself, maybe selecting Saber for the easier difficulty so the frustrations with combat ease up a little. If the story didn't intrigue you, I don't think Fate Extra will entice you enough with its gameplay to justify a 25 to 30 hour playthrough. With all that said, I will be placing Fate Extra at the number 9 spot, which may be a lot higher than many of you were expecting. Simply put, I'm someone who puts great value on characters and story in video games, something I believe Fate Extra excels at. When I'm engaging with the story or getting to know more about the cast, Fate Extra absolutely hooks me. Because I enjoy both these elements so much, I personally can endure the other frustrations the game puts my way. To the average gamer though, Fate Extra's flaws can be almost unbearable, and I fully understand why someone would want to put this game down. To me though, Fate Extra's highs hit all the right notes to boost it up a fair bit in the ranking. Just be wary of the flaws I mentioned if you consider picking this game up for yourself. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video as much as I did making it. Next time, we'll be looking at another crossover fighting game, though this one is much more obscure than any of the other ones we've seen previously. So if you're interested in lesser known collaborations, keep your eyes peeled for next time. In the meanwhile, thank you so much for watching this video. Take care, may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.